happening? Well, I know someone who's hot on this story. Her name is Rupa Subramanya, and her latest story in the National Post is called "The Progressive Left Discards Muslims as Un-Canadian." She joins us now via Skype. Rupa, this is very, very interesting. And it's very difficult for the left to talk about. Well, I think it's difficult for the right to talk about also. How do you reconcile these things? Tell me a little bit about what's going on as these Muslim families express their objections to some of the more extreme sexuality teachings.
Well, thanks, Ezra. It's great to be back on your show again. It's quite fascinating what's happening in the culture war space. So suddenly, when I was at this protest last weekend, one of the things that struck me about the protest, I mean, it was striking to anybody who was there, is that you had devout Muslim parents facing off against a woke progressive left standing up for trans rights. And it was a little, I would say there was a bit of a cognitive dissonance happening there as far as the progressives were concerned, because they didn't really expect what they imagined. They didn't expect the people. They thought that this would be far right white supremacists in attendance protesting against gender ideology. But it turns out these were people that the left has supported, under the guise of progressivism, especially when it comes to things like what is perceived to be Islamophobia. So that was pretty interesting, and the reaction to the protests. I shared some of these videos that I shot on Twitter, and the reactions from some very prominent progressives on social media was that, perhaps, we should reconsider immigration. We should, these people don't represent Canadian values. Perhaps it's time to put a hard stop on immigration from countries that don't share Canadian values. And some even said, I think you should go back to where you came from. Now, typically these comments are associated with the far right. If you want to, typically that's what the progressive left has been saying. But this actually came from them, and that was pretty striking to me.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I believe in a cultural test to come to Canada. We want people who believe in pluralism. And on the subject of gay rights, we don't want people who absolutely, have a rage against gay rights. I mean, some of these countries, homosexuality is punishable by death. Iran hangs gays. Saudi Arabia stones them. I don't know how frequent that is these days. So on the one hand, I sympathize with some, not just economic questions for immigrants, but are you cool with the way we are as Canadians? But I think that what is being pushed in these schools is so radical, so extreme, that I think it's so much further than anyone historically has said, well, this is Canadian values. And so it's not a surprise to me that socially conservative Muslims are the first to speak out and say, whoa, that's not what we thought we were coming to. I don't know, for a little bit, I can understand it, but it's shocking to see how quickly the left turns on visible minorities, immigrants, Muslims, who until 5 minutes ago, they would have said, how dare you talk about a Muslim ban? I mean, that's Donald Trump stuff, talking about a Muslim immigration ban. It's fascinating to watch.
No, absolutely. And to be very, very clear here, you didn't see devout Muslims protesting against the pride flag or pride, or even gay rights for that matter, a few years ago. This is all pretty recent. And this goes to the point that you're making, which is gender ideology, has become so pervasive now, and it's literally being shoved down their throat. And this is what they were protesting. They were protesting against the indoctrination of their kids with radical gender ideology. So it's very important. Look, I mean, these people came here, many immigrant Muslims come here knowing full well that this is a country that stands for certain things. And so they've already agreed to that. They've already accepted it as a fait accompli. But what's happening now is that we've unearthed, the progressive left, this is they're doing really. They've brought out Muslims who, out and outright reject homosexuality because it goes against Islamic teachings. Look, I mean, it's their right to believe whatever they want to believe in. If they want to protest against it, that's also fine. Freedom of expression and all of that stuff. But it is, for me, it was a bit disturbing to see kids stomping on the pride flag and the parents cheering them on. And I also want to make it very clear that the protest, as organized by Chris Elston, Billboard Chris, and Josh Alexander, was to protest against gender ideology, not against gay rights. That's a very important point to make, and one has to keep making that repeatedly, because the other side often, I think, deliberately will mischaracterize such protests as being against gay rights, which is not the case. A lot of these people just reject gender ideology being taught in schools in the way it's being taught.
Yeah, I think one thing that Chris Elston, I've interviewed him a few times, says is no one's born in the wrong body. And in fact, a lot of this gender ideology says if you're gay, no, you're in the wrong body. We've got to chop off your body parts, give you certain hormones. So I think in some ways the LGBT, the T, is contrary to the L and the G, as in Chris Elston I don't think he's anti-gay at all. He's saying stop trying to change people's gender, especially if they're young. Let me play a clip of what the mom and the sister of those Muslim kids dancing on the pride flag said. It's very interesting, and I paid close attention to what they said, at least in the clip that I saw. There may be others. They didn't say, we're anti-gay. They said, leave the kids alone. Here, take a look.
Kids alone! Leave the 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 kids alone!
Yeah, I mean, just to push back a little bit on that, Ezra. I did speak to that same mother and daughter and their little boy, and I have to be honest here. They were also against homosexuality. That was very clear in my interview with them.
Did you like this? No, it's like too disgusting. It's too disgusting. And this stuff, no, they're going to hell if they keep on doing this.
And so that's, that was one of the reasons why I wrote this column for the National Post, because inadvertently, religion has come into the picture. It was always going to be there. It was always there in the background. But now, people who had initially just accepted these as, this is part and parcel of being in this country. This is what these are Canadian values, and they're here and they've accepted all of that. But because of how things have gone recently, the direction in which we're heading, they've just, they just don't want anything to do with this at all. And my concern is that, there's a risk here that there might be a regression in this consensus that had been built over the years over gay rights. And I worry that there might be a regression as far as that's concerned.
Isn't that interesting? Well, first of all, I accept, obviously, you were on the ground there. You talked to these people. I was just relying on little clips I found. It's very interesting. And Muslim immigration to Canada is very large. I think the Muslim community is well over 1 million people, and it's concentrated in certain cities and certain districts. For example, in Ottawa, some schools had 60% of kids stay home for Pride Day, 60%. And we know that when a more gender extreme transgender curriculum was brought in a few years back, there were some schools into the Toronto area where 90% of the kids were kept home. So I think we are coming apart. You talked about sort of a commonality. I think it's coming apart. And I think we can look at other places in the world to see how this will end. I've been to Malmo, Sweden, and I've been to, parts of northern England where the vast majority of certain communities, like over 90%, are Muslim. And in Sweden, you'd think that's the most gay positive country in the world, right? But in Malmo, in Rosengård, kids born in Sweden are talking about banning homosexuality. And I think that the left cannot hold its coalition together. And if I have to guess which part of this coalition is going to win, I'm going to guess it's the Muslim part, just for sheer demographic numbers. That's my observation from Rosengård, Sweden, and from parts of Manchester and the greater London area. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I really, Sweden is a great example, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I really hope that we don't head in that direction, because I've been to Sweden, I've been to Malmo as well, and there are these no-go areas, as you know, and that's not what I would like to see in Canada. We have tons of problems, but I really wish that that's not going to be one of them in the near future.
That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest, either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid's show every week. It's called The Gun Show. It's pretty amazing. We rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.